We fixed the GTX 1080 Ti Founders Edition card. As noted in the review, it had some thermal limitations with the clock, so the clock boosting behavior was not ideal with one of these on it. We kind of proof of concepted this plan by throwing the fan speed to 80%, but that's way too loud to bear, so we fixed it by adding a liquid cooler instead. Before getting to that, this coverage is brought to you by EVGA and their closed loop liquid cooling kit. You can buy the 1080 model and it'll still work with this. The shroud compatibility isn't always perfect, but the liquid cooler will work just fine on one of these. So if you want to do your mod the way we did ours, you could grab one of those kits, link in the description below, and throw it on by following our first and second videos as guides. So now that we've got that covered, this project was a bit different from our previous hybrid builds, and the way it was different is sort of exciting. We added these thermocouples to the FETs and backside of the PCB, which is something that I've been doing for a little while now on GPU stuff since the EVGA VRM testing we did, and later some other PCB and backplate tests that have been published since. Adding those allows us to see one really interesting metric that we haven't seen before, which is, does adding one of these negatively impact the temperature of the VRM components, the MOSFETs and the backplate or anything like that, the backside of the PCB? Because we're taking away this. This is a pretty large, anyway, for a Founders Edition card, pretty large air cooler. So it's just a heat sink with a vapor chamber in it. Pulling that off means we lose some of our surface area, and means that the fan in here becomes less efficient at what it's trying to do. That said, the base plate of the card is still pretty damn big. It's still a big metal base plate. It's still connected by a lot of thermal pads to the components underneath, and we still have a blower fan on the VRMs that can now spin at a lower RPM, which again is PWM controlled by the GPU, so that's another potential concern, because now your blower fan spins at something like 22%, because the GPU is always under 50 by way of using a liquid cooler. So there's a lot of interesting concerns with regard to VRM temperatures as a result of improving GPU temperatures. Improving GPU temperatures can worsen VRM temperatures because the PWM-controlled VRM blower fan slaves to the GPU temperature, the diode that outputs the GPU temperatures. So very interesting stuff to test. And we have thermal results, we have clock frequency stability over time, and then we've got some gaming FPS results as well. For full testing methodology, as always, hit the link in the description below to the article. That contains a fairly sizable section on how the thermal tests are conducted. One note, I really want to add VRAM testing as well. That wasn't done for this one, but we're looking at it for the future. It's just a matter of upgrading the thermocouple readers at this point, basically. But we have VRMs covered. That's all discussed in the testing methodology. Game test methods are also down there, as well as the CPU used in the bench, RAM, all that stuff. Find that in the link below. Let's get into it with thermals. This chart has a lot going on, so breaking it down one line at a time. First, all the top lines in the legend represent the TI Founders Edition card without our fix or cooler or hack job, whatever you may call it, including the green line representing GPU core temperature. That green line sits around 84°C in this endurance test, which is NVIDIA's thermal limit point. Under stock conditions, the card will not allow the frequency to boost to a point that forces temperature beyond 84°C. Looking at the GN hybrid variant of the same card, same PCB, and same GPU, the actual GPU, nothing's changed other than the cooler, we're clearly at around 45°C. That is substantial, and we're looking at a 40°C reduction in temperature. There's further benefit spreading to frequency boosting headroom, which we'll look at in a moment. The big question here is whether removing the vapor chamber and heatsink negatively impact FET cooling. My card still has that massive base plate as discussed, but we lose the heatsink. The short answer is no. The big cluster of lines in the 65 to 70°C range represents the FET2 and FET7 temperatures for both revisions of the TI card. There's no significant difference. We can't even really see one line for the other in this mess of them because they're all about the same temperature. And for the FETs we monitored, it's fair to say that the temperature is effectively equal to the Founders Edition card unmodified. Even if there were an increase, it would have to be substantial to cause any concern. VRM components can take a lot of heat, upwards of 125 to 150°C in some cases, most cases really. Ideally though, we're lower than that to reduce derating or inefficiency concerns, and we are well below that range with these results. As for the impact on thermals versus clock rate, we can already hypothesize that the clock will be flatter and less sporadic in its fluctuations when under liquid. This conclusion can be formed just by looking at the previous frequency chart from the 1080 Ti review. We're running an 80% but sort of intolerable fan speed, allowed for greater performance in the boosting behavior. Of course, this also introduces an unbearable level of noise, and so isn't acceptable for long uptimes. In fact, the fan never jumps that high from the stock NVIDIA fan speed curve to begin with. It tends to plateau around 50 to 55%, so even the stock curve really doesn't want you to go beyond that unless it's absolutely necessary, and that's for noise reasons. Looking at the new frequency versus time and temperature chart, moving off the old one, we see the pink line representing the GN Hybrid 1080 Ti, which is able to sustain a higher clock overall and a flatter line. That's a good thing. There's a lot less fluctuation here. Keep in mind that, as stated previously, this is with a power virus test. We're mostly burning the FETs here, and so the cores don't boost as high as they would in a real-world video game test, despite being burned hotter than any other application. For thermals, we see the GN Hybrid card operating below 50C, generally in the 45C range, with the FE version of the same GPU and PCB at around 65 Celsius when at 80% fan speed, or 84 when at auto speeds, and that would probably be worse if we were allowed to boost frequency to the same frequencies as in the hybrid version. Clock fluctuation is no more than 30 megahertz in the worst cases on the hybrid card, which is a pretty marked improvement over the stock Founders Edition card. Going into FPS tests, the thing to note here that's most interesting is this card, the hybrid version we've built of the Founders Edition 1080 Ti, is capable, without an overclock applied manually, of boosting higher than the stock settings. That is because we removed the thermal limit. So we're going to be testing this no overclock stock versus the stock 1080 Ti with the original cooling setup, this. And we'll be able to see if just doing the mod with no overclocking improves performance. It does. And then we'll add an overclock for a couple of games on this, though not going too deep on it today. That's still another topic. We'll look at a few games though. Starting our FPS performance testing with Ghost Recon Wildlands at 4K and very high settings, we see the GTX 1080 Ti is outperformed by our stock 1080 Ti hybrid mod. And that's without any overclocks applied. This is because, again, the thermal limiter has been removed, so the GPU can boost higher clocks than the FE cooler would allow. This result would be more exaggerated, at least to some extent, as playtime extends. Our FPS difference ends up being 55 FPS average versus 57, so 2, when only the cooler is exchanged. Lows also improve marginally from 45 and 42 to 51 and 47, and overclock in the GN Hybrid with a 150 MHz offset and a 450 MHz memory offset lands our frequency in the range of 1950 to 2050 MHz, depending on workload and voltage and power limitations. That lands performance at about 60 FPS average. That's an increase of approximately 9% over the stock FE card, or an increase of about 5.8% over the GN Hybrid stock card. Moving on to 1440p, we see the GN Hybrid model again outperform the stock Ti by just a couple FPS. And no, this is not within margin of error. The difference is repeatable and measurable. Lows improve to 81 and 77 FPS from 74 and 66 FPS. Overclocking the 1080 Ti hybrid puts us up to 98 FPS average, though the 0.1% values do reveal that our clock is bordering instability here, hence some of the lower values in that category. Backing down on the 150 MHz core and 450 MHz memory offsets would improve this metric a bit, though you do lose some in the average department. Finally, 1080p shows that the 1080 Ti is genuinely capable of hitting 120 FPS average in this game for lovers of high refresh displays at these settings under the right conditions. In this case, those conditions are the GN Hybrid card. We can push to 120 FPS from the stock card's 115 average, with lows also improved markedly. Overclocking our hybrid pushes us to nearly 126 FPS average. That's an improvement of about 9% over the stock 1080 Ti FE card, or about 5% over the GN Hybrid with no OC. Looking at For Honor with extreme settings next, 4K positions the 1080 Ti FE at 66 FPS average, superseded by the GN Hybrid at 70 FPS average. That's an increase of about 6% just by changing the coolers, and is indicative of the kind of performance gains you should expect from AIB partner models of the 1080 Ti. Overclocking our hybrid, we land at 76 FPS average, or about 15.6% faster than the FE stock card. Pretty impressive, or 9% faster than the GN Hybrid stock card. Lows exhibit the same behavior as previously noted. At 1440p, the hybrid mod with an overclock propels our 1080 Ti up to the 144 Hz range, now achieving 148 FPS average versus the 130 average of the stock FE card, or 137 of the hybrid stock card. Lows scale mostly linearly except for the 0.1% metrics. Again, this change nets us a 14% increase in performance over the completely stock FE card looking at averages, though the non-overclocked hybrid is about 5% better than the non-overclocked FE card. 1080p is sort of comical with this game, but we're still testing it for a baseline for the vast majority of people still on 1080p displays. At 1080p, the non-overclocked GN hybrid posts a performance gain of about 5.2% over the stock FE card with no improvement in lows. The overclocked variant posts a gain of about 20 FPS or around 10% over the stock FE card and about 5% over the hybrid stock card. Let's move on to Doom. Looking at Doom with Vulkan and 4K resolution, we see the 1080 Ti reference card at 90 FPS average, outperformed by the 1080 Ti GN hybrid by about 5.8%. Our lows also increase marginally, and this is fairly consistent in terms of percentage gains when looking at previous tests. This shows a continued 5 to 6% increase in headroom when better coolers come into play. We've also got 1440p and 1080p numbers for Doom published on the website if you're curious. That's linked in the description below. Let's do one more with Sniper Elite. We've got Ashes and synthetic tests alongside the other 1440 and 1080 tests in the article linked below. Again, if you're looking for more results, at 4K with high settings, DX12 and async enabled, the 1080 Ti GN hybrid pushes 84 FPS with lows at 67 and 65. Comparatively, the 1080 Ti FE card runs at 76 FPS average, 64 1% lows, and 61 0.1% lows. The difference in averages is about 10.5% for one of the more substantial gains we've measured. So that was a pretty fun test. The thing that I was actually really interested in was just the VRM testing stuff in terms of the FET thermals. I really want to do VRAM testing in the future, but we need to upgrade some equipment so that I can have more thermocouples running simultaneously because we're maxed out at 4 right now. Overall, the results look good. This does a few things for us. One, if you don't want to do this, that's fine. Just know that the, 5 to 6% gains we see in most cases stock with a better cooler should be representative of what you'll be seeing in a couple of weeks when the AIB partner models roll out. Those obviously might have some pre-overclocks that changes things, but if you're strictly looking at the cooler with the same clock configuration other than boost behavior, this is representative of what you'll see there. In terms of overclocking and doing this, we get a lot of headroom. Now, of course, you could overclock the 1080 Ti FE as well, and we still need to do some of that. It's been really packed lately with trips. But overall, this project definitely is worth it for a bit of fun if you like doing this kind of thing. If you'd prefer not to, then wait around for AIB models if you are actually buying a 1080 Ti. Check our review to see if it's a good buy for you. But AIB models will do more or less the same thing, just without the effort involved. If you're okay with doing the effort and buying, I don't know what this sells for now, it generally is about $100. Buying a $100 kit, it's a fun project. It's not too hard to do if you watch our videos. And the performance gain in thermals is tremendous. 40 Celsius in the core clock, about the same for the FETs. The performance gain in stock frequency is also noteworthy, a couple percent, 5 to 6% in most games as stated, sometimes more. And then the overclocking headroom is also improved because we've removed some of the thermal limitation. And the FETs do just fine for the most part. Well, actually, they do just fine, period. Though we still need to measure VRAM. So that's all for this time. Go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. Click the link in the description below for the article or the sponsor. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.